everybody scoot on in. Thank you all for coming out tonight. I'm Harry Carver. I'm currently the chair of the coordinators for Together Frankfort. Am I holding this closer? Okay. I want to thank everybody for coming out and also thank the folks that made the chili. And we all ate. And we should have brought Go Cups because I think there's still some left back there, so make sure you eat before you go if you haven't eaten already. Together Frankfort was organized 9 years ago by a group of volunteers that were concerned about the state of our elections.
Oh, thank you.
A community meeting was held to establish goals for the group. The two main goals being registering folks to vote and providing them with accurate and timely information so that voters made an educated decision. To this end, Together Frankfort over time has organized and hosted a variety of events designed to inform and engage the citizens of Frankfort and Franklin County, including our Civics 101 series as well as timely town halls. We've also sponsored demonstrations and community events such as Earth Day and partnering with organizations to make sure that we achieved our mission in getting folks involved and educated. Above all, though, we do work towards registering folks to vote throughout the year at every available opportunity. Before we get started with the program, we have a little bit of business to do since this is our annual meeting. We need to accept our new slate of coordinators for the coming year, and that would be me, Katie, where's Katie Doherty? Judy Goddard, Don Hale, Kay Harker, Bill Clear, Jeffrey Laird, Patty Porter, Barbara Hadley Smith, David Stumbo, and Margaret Townsley. Everybody wave. And then we are also this year excited to add, we have 4 new folks coming on as coordinators. Misha Branscombe, who could not be here tonight, her son was sick and then she came down with the same thing, so it's not going wrong. Aaron Marshall, where's Aaron? Aaron, yay. Lyda Phillips, Lyda. And Gayleen Stringfellow, where's Gayleen? Wave, Gayleen. So I'm assuming everybody's good with this, and these folks will be leading the charge for Together Frankfort for the next year. I want to recognize one of our coordinators that has been around since the beginning, who is going to be leaving us, and she would like to do a special recognition. Linda Waller. Linda, where are you? Come on.
Am I doing this right? Together Frankfort wants to recognize a very special couple, Don and Sylvia Coffey. Where are they? There they are. I think a lot of you will know Sylvia from her work with the Kentucky Women's Heritage Alliance. And they made a special effort to memorialize the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment. And they had a show that they took on the road as costumed suffragists. They sang, they spoke. They made sure that it was honored properly. Another example of their civic engagement is their long and valued support of Together Frankfort. As treasurer, I know exactly what that means. Every month for years, we have gotten support from the Coffeys. Not just a check, but every month we would get words of wisdom. It could be policy programs. It could be campaign ideas. It could be prose. It could be poetry. Never knew what to expect, but it was always interesting. So I want everybody to know and appreciate and be inspired by these civic leaders.
Here, here. Thank you all. Now we'll get on with the program. I want to introduce our moderator of the panel, who is probably going to take a more active role than moderating.
Maybe.
Unfortunately, Shonda was not able to come tonight because they're putting out the newspaper early this week because in anticipation of the storm. So anyway, she was tied up with that. So anyway, Laura is the editor and publisher of the Kentucky Gazette, a Frankfort-based public affairs journal. During the legislative session, you may hear her on Capitol Chat on UKY, and she's an occasional panelist on KET's public affairs program, Comment on Kentucky. She's won several awards for editorial writing and has served as a judge for newspaper contests in several states. She's a former assistant professor of journalism at K-State, where she was the advisor to the student newspaper, the Thoroughbred News. In 2024, the KPA awarded her and her other campus advisors the Russ Metz Most Valuable Member Award. So we appreciate her being here tonight, and she will introduce the rest of the panel, and you can either sit or stand, whatever it is you want to do. Thank you.
I'll sit for now. Thank you, Harry. Thanks for the kind words. And thanks for hosting this. This is a good topic for public discussion. Our panelists tonight are Terry Carter. And Terry is an opinion columnist for the Anderson News, and she's been writing about Kentucky politics for decades now, right?
One
decade. One decade.
It feels like more.
But she has written on fiscal courts to demand transparency. She has worked against open carry and concealed weapons on college campuses, among other topics. She's also was communications director for Moms Demand Action on gun control legislation. She's been published in the Kentucky Lantern, MSNBC, and the Washington Post. Very impressive.
Thank you.
So she's here with us. And then most people here know Al.
Unfortunately, I don't know most people here.
Yeah, but you're a famous journalist. Al is professor emeritus of journalism at UK. Most of us know him. I know him from the Courier-Journal. When I first started working at the Gazette, he was still writing for the Courier-Journal back in the day. But he was national president of the Society of Professional Journalists, and he most recently was director of the Institute for Rural Journalism at the University of Kentucky. And he also shared in a Pulitzer Prize at the Courier-Journal for coverage of the Carrollton bus accident. So,
with lots of other people.
Still, I don't envy you having to cover that. So these are our panelists. As Harry said, Shanda couldn't be here tonight. They're putting the paper to bed early in anticipation of the storm. So we'll get started. I think the format was to allow each of you to speak for 10 minutes or so, and then I've got a few questions, and then we'll maybe just open it. We had some good conversation while we were having chili, so hopefully that can move out into the open a little bit more. But if you'd like to start, please.
I'm going to let Al start.
Yeah, he's intimidating us with all the paperwork and stuff.
He brought homework for me. I don't know. It makes me very nervous, that big yellow folder.
So
I know.
Remind me again, what's our topic? Exactly.
Oh, I'm
Specific.
sorry.
We thought you were just asking questions and we were answering them.
Al,
it deals
you need to read the emails.
It deals with local journalism.
Yes.
Exactly how was it phrased?
Focus on local journalism.
Focus on local
Okay,
journalism.
and I can throw out the first question. It's like, why is it important?
Well,
Why
because
does it
it's
matter?
the fundamental, the gearbox of democracy. The Constitution and the First Amendment presume that citizens are going to be properly informed to cast their ballots and hold public officials accountable. And the news media in this country have gone through a great evolution since the First Amendment took effect in about 1791. And we had a golden age there for about the last half of the 20th century. We had large, robust, independent, nonpartisan news media that covered national news, state news and local news. Sure, the editorial pages of the major papers in the country had a liberal leaning, with the exception of the Wall Street Journal. And there were many local papers that had strong political leanings, but they did a pretty good job of separating fact from opinion and keeping the opinion to the editorial page. I'm doing a book on Earl Clements, and it's amazing to see what level of coverage there was in local newspapers, weekly newspapers even, back in the 40s and 50s when Clements and Combs and Chandler were fighting their battles. We don't see much of that anymore, partly because most newspapers today are owned by chains. In this golden age I'm talking about, we had a cadre of family ownership, people who had journalism in their DNA. They were in the newspaper business because they wanted to render public service. Now, sure, they wanted to make money, and they did make a lot of money, but it was easy to do back in those days. If you had a monopoly newspaper, it was a license to print money. But things have changed. And as the technology has changed and the world has changed, so has the ownership of these newspapers. Today, most daily newspapers in this country of any size are owned by hedge funds, companies that are simply out to make money. And if you know anything about hedge funds, you know they buy a valuable asset and they suck it dry and then sell off the husk to somebody else having made their money. It doesn't make any difference to them if they sell it for less than they bought it. They've gotten the cash flow out of it. And these companies operate with rules like this. I was going to mention this even if Chanda were here tonight, but the company that owns the State Journal, Carpenter News Media, it has a rule that payroll can be no more than 28% of revenue. Now, in the days when I was in the newspaper business, payroll was often more than half of revenue. And when my friend John Nelson, who was the editor at Danville, saw that his paper had been bought by a company that had a 38% rule, he resigned so they'd have room to pay two people with the salary that he had. We have newspapers today that are driven primarily by the profit motive, and that's why you have one reporter at the State Journal and one sports reporter and an editor and stories that read like stenography instead of regular news stories. I think Chanda and her folks do the best they can, but just to be frank, it needs to be a lot better. And if you want a better newspaper, folks, you're going to have to do something about it. I like to say that every American has the First Amendment right to commit journalism. Now, why do you think I use that verb? Because if you're going to call it journalism, there's a certain set of responsibilities that you have to hold to. You got to be ethical and accurate and fair, and those fundamentals of journalism are not all that hard for people to understand. There are so many smart people in this town who could be doing journalism, and I mean news journalism, for the State Journal, if they would allow it. We get public meetings covered better and more frequently. And I think some of you would probably enjoy the experience. The dirty little secret of journalism schools, after having taught in one for 20 years, I can tell you is they're not really necessary.
Wait.
All you really need
You've already made her mad.
Well, let's say that they're not necessary for the provision of quality journalism, because all you really need to be a journalist is curiosity, courage, and some facility with the English language. The best student I ever had never had a journalism course. Of course, he was a graduate of Harvard and Yale. But, there are plenty of smart people in this town, and I'll bet you in this room, who could do some good journalism for the State Journal. And I was prompted to bring this up because I read this wonderful column by John Arnett in the State Journal at the end of last month. He said that he had spent countless hours covering meetings for newspapers for decades. Well, I'd like to see John and some other people get back in the business, because people in a community deserve a knowledgeable, comprehensive, and independent report of what their public officials are doing. And if you read the State Journal and you find that it's not meeting those standards, then do something about it. This is your community, and every American does have the First Amendment right to commit journalism. And if they won't let you do it at the State Journal, then, get together with some folks and have a startup. I have a clip here from Hopkinsville. My friend Jennifer P. Brown was the editor of the Kentucky New Era for many years, about 20 years. And she finally got fed up with the ownership and started her own outfit called the Hoptown Chronicle. And it is now a self-sustaining, online-only local news operation that basically tells the folks in Hopkinsville what they need to know. Now, they don't cover the fiscal court meetings or the city commission meetings unless there's some bigger issue, because there's actually a pretty good radio station in Hopkinsville that does that. But there's plenty of opportunities out there for Americans to get involved in public service through journalism. And I wish some of you would think about doing it.
Thanks, Al. I should add, too, the Kentucky Gazette, for those of you who don't know, is independently owned. We don't have a parent company that runs that. So if you want to write, well, give me a holler.
The best journalism is independently owned, and of course, if the person doing what's called journalism is not independent,
Right.
It's not really journalism. It's public relations.
Yes, and I do want to touch on that, too.
Okay.
But
I'll go.
yes, go ahead. Tell us.
So as Al was talking, I was reminded of the first time that I think Al was either in a meeting that I was in or at a presentation I was doing, and somebody said something about me being a journalist, and I said, well, I'm not a journalist. And Al said, yes, you are. And I said, well, I didn't go to journalism school. Yeah, and Al's response was, it's your job to commit journalism, and you just need to have courage and the ability to write. Really.
And curiosity.
And curiosity.
You gotta know how to ask questions.
You want to know what's going on. Yeah. And the second thing that Al told me that he may or may not remember is he said, I forget what was happening, but he said, when you show up in Anderson County at fiscal court, at this point, they don't know if you're there as a citizen to complain, if you're there as a reporter to report, or if you are there to write an opinion column. So they kind of don't know what to do. And it confuses them. And I started noticing that when I would go, it would be kind of like, oh God, she's here. Why is she here? But I showed up in Anderson County in 2015-16. I had never committed any journalism at all, and had no intent to. And I had written a few pieces for the Herald Leader, opinion pieces in late 16, early 2017. And Mitch McConnell came to Anderson County in February of 2017, and I was at that town hall, and it was pretty incredible. And as I was leaving, Ben Carlson, who was the editor of the Anderson News, was outside, and I had no idea who he was. We took the Anderson News because we subscribed when we arrived in town, because what do you do when you arrive in a new town? You want to know what's going on in the town. So I walked out of that meeting, and he said, you that lady that writes for the Herald Leader, will you write for me for free? And I said, yes. So I committed to Ben that I would write a column for him every 2 weeks for free, and I did that for 3 years. And at the time, the Anderson News, when I arrived in, again, 2016, was a robust newspaper. There was a sports reporter, there was an office, an editor, a sports editor, a receptionist, and there would always be a reporter if Ben wasn't there himself at every school board meeting, at fiscal court, at City Hall, et cetera. And
it was a quality product too.
Yeah, it was a really good paper. And it was so good that it came out on Thursday mornings, and even though I was subscribed to the paper and it would arrive in my mailbox, I would go to the 5-Star at 7 o'clock on Wednesday morning, and I would get a paper, because that was the first place it was delivered, and everybody knew it.
You know, that is one of the measures of a great newspaper.
You buy it twice.
That's right. This happened in Russellville when I was working for Al Smith. Our press was in an old hardware store, remodeled hardware store, with a big plate glass window and an American flag in the front. And when the press rolled, people would come up and start buying papers, even though they had subscriptions, because they knew we were going to tell them what they needed to know.
And I would find out what I needed to know. I would grab my paper in my truck with my dogs. I would go walk the dogs in the park, and then I would drive straight to a friend's office, and we would sit in her office and we would read the paper, and we would talk about what we all were talking about. And that's what the town talked about for that week until the next Thursday when the next paper came out. Mm-hmm. And it was really fun. I mean, it was fun to be involved. It was a good way as a new person in town to get to know my neighbors. Some liked it, some didn't. It didn't really matter. They got used to me being there. I got used to them. And committing journalism was very fun. I loved it. And 10 years later, I just continued to do more of it. So much so that I served on the board with Al of the Society for Professional Journalists for a couple of years, and that was really fun for me to get involved with those guys. But I'm really sad about what's happened to the Anderson News, which is barely a slip of a paper anymore. The editor is now in Bullitt County. We no longer have an office. We have a reporter that works part-time. She has a full-time job. She occasionally goes to fiscal court or City Hall. And her reports are like she's the secretary of a meeting. It's exactly. This happened and that happened and that happened, but there is no context. And
the story I remember from the Anderson News in the last year, the best, is the one about the vote for Sunday liquor.
Oh.
The fiscal court voted 4-3 to allow Sunday liquor sales, and it didn't say who voted what way.
Oh, I've seen that. Yeah, I've seen that.
They had just read the minutes of the meeting.
Yeah.
They hadn't been to the meeting apparently, and this is not much better than the locally sourced chum that a lot of AI operations are doing in local markets, largely in suburban areas. You know, it's just not what you need to know.
Well, I'm sorry.
And since Al brought up, started this with you guys potentially committing journalism, the thing that you bring that someone else does not is that you know your town, you know your community, you know who the elected officials are, you know who they are related to, you know if somebody on fiscal court is the cousin of somebody on city council or on the board of zoning. You know these things because you live here and you know all these people. Somebody new coming in, like the reporter we have now, she's very nice, but she doesn't know anything. She can't put anything in context. She doesn't know that the judge executive's son-in-law is the one that runs animal control. And animal control got a new vehicle when somebody else didn't. And so she doesn't connect those dots. And it's not her fault. It's not her fault that this is what she's been tasked with because there's no money. But one of you could go to one of those meetings and write a much better story about what's really happening. Now you have to be prepared for the blowback that you're going to get if somebody doesn't like what you had to say. But that's kind of fun too, honestly.
Yeah, unfortunately, we have too many people working at newspapers today who are afraid of blowback and are timid about what they write. And they're in the wrong field of work.
Yeah.
Well, and there's a difference, too, between covering the news and writing opinion pieces, too. And I'd like to touch on that a little bit.
That's important.
Al's background is more on the news side, not the editorial page, although you write columns and have written columns. But those types of columns are more analytical. Some of your older pieces, something that a lot of people don't know, but good editorials are reported as deeply as a news story is reported. You have to get facts and those types of things. But then Terry writes opinion pieces, strictly opinion pieces.
But they are fact-based. I mean,
Absolutely.
I have
Absolutely.
to cite my sources. I have to actually
100%.
have sources, yeah.
But how does that play into what the public thinks of as journalism? Like, how does that affect the public's perception? We have a problem in journalism right now of not being trusted.
People can't tell fact that they can't differentiate between fact and opinion because they get so much information. You know, people are subjected to a flood of information every day, and most of it is opinion. When I was president of SPJ 23 years ago, I said the market for opinion in this country is increasing, and the market for fact is decreasing because people would rather receive information that confirms what they already believe rather than have some sort of contrary information that challenges what they believe. It's just human nature. And, you know, for decades, the better part of a century, we had news organizations that had effective monopolies, and they knew they had to be fair about how they covered things, but they also were careful about separating fact from opinion. And the advent of television began to erode that. You know, you had to put a little sizzle with the steak, the consultants said.
If it bleeds, it leads.
And that's true even in the print business. You got to have a little sizzle, but, you know, the sizzle can overcome the steak. And it was very easy for Roger Ailes and Fox News to make a case to much of the American public that there was an Eastern liberal media establishment that was misleading them. Because on occasion it did. You know, you can cherry pick plenty of examples. But now, Fox News was founded in 1996. This is 30 years later. We've had a whole generation of people who are accustomed to seeing news presented in a certain frame, through a certain lens. And when they read better journalism, they think it's biased.
So what do we do about that?
I don't know.
As practitioners, I mean, or as a community, I mean.
You're not going to break up Rupert Murdoch. So.
No, and it's something to think about. A couple people, Harry mentioned, Al, Terry have all said about people being involved, educated, informed. But with local papers folding and losing reporters and local staff, are we turning into a society of information and journalism haves and have-nots?
Yeah. But when I worked for the Courier Journal, we had a household penetration in the Louisville metropolitan area of about 60%. That meant 60% of the people in Louisville Metro received the Courier Journal regularly, usually by delivery, but sometimes they'd pick it up on the stand. And now the typical penetration of a daily newspaper in the United States is less than 10%.
Wow. I grew up in Oldham County. We took the morning, the Courier Journal and the Louisville Times in the afternoon.
Yeah, and when you combine the Courier and the Times together, I mean, the penetration was over 70.
Yeah.
And what I hear a lot now when I'm out in the community is everybody wants me to start a podcast. God help me. I have no interest. I always say, I'm a writer. I need to write to be able to think my way through what I'm trying to say. And the majority of the time, the column never ends where I started. I always think I'm writing about this thing over here, and any writer in here knows this. You end up and you go, oh, that's what I was really thinking,
yeah.
But I have to write my way to it. And
podcasts are almost all about opinion.
It's shooting the bull. It's not even having
and people would
facts.
rather be entertained than informed. That's just a flat fact.
Right.
It's sad, but it's true.
It's hard to recognize you're a writer in an era where nobody reads, which is what I hear when I'm in town. I wish you would have a podcast because then people would pay attention. And I think, but there's so many podcasts. Everything will
just
get
get
drowned out
lost.
anyway. Yeah.
Good. I think we're at the point where we can start taking questions from the audience. Yes, please.
I have a question. Counting time from the late 1950s, when I began to attain my adult literacy, I've been a lifelong reader of good newspapers. I started with the Courier-Journal, and I moved to the Washington Post. And I remember the State Journal here in Frankfort when it was a fine newspaper about 1999. And it was to go down to a husk. And what's true with the loss of all these great newspapers that used to be, and what we've allowed the replacement to become, has something to do with capitalism. I'd like to see a show of hands in this room. How many people think that when the State Journal finally fades away to dust, and they lay off and they all have to go find new jobs, and have no newspaper at all in the state's capital, how many think we could set up a do-it-yourself citizen committee to run a non-profit organization that would produce a damn newspaper in our town?
It's happened in other towns. You can do it.
It wouldn't be so poor and have so few employees that can afford to get paid if they weren't sucking all the profit out to the big corporations, especially the time you cited. If you don't have to suck out the profit, you got more money to pay employees and print papers. And they don't need to go to work for something like the first or second grade on teaching people to read newspapers instead of clicking on their click list.
Well, I've always said that on every homepage, I haven't always said this, I've said this for about 5 years. On every homepage and every editorial page of a news outlet needs to say, we practice journalism. That means we have a discipline of verification. We tell you how we know something, or we attribute it to somebody.
Well, that would say, I'll sit down when I see how many people show your hand.
Yeah, raise your hand, raise your hand.
Set up a non-profit corporation and do it ourselves right. I don't want to lead it, but let me know when it's good.
Well, you may have an example just next door. Ben Chandler owns the Woodford Sun, and he's taking it nonprofit. As his wife likes to say, it's been nonprofit for a long time.
Well, and that's something we've talked about with the Kentucky Gazette as well.
Yeah.
Is going nonprofit, and we're based here in Frankfort,
Yeah.
so.
And I think it has a lot of potential. Now, one of the inherent risks in starting a nonprofit operation is that you aim to please the people who fund it and support it. And we've seen a trend in some of these nonprofits. They're mostly liberal because it's liberals who are supporting them. And I would rather not see, if there was a nonprofit newspaper in the state's capital, I would rather not see it be identified with any particular ideology. This is a Republican state. The Republicans in the legislature set the policy for the state. We're probably going to have a Republican governor. I just think that there's still a good, solid principle in having a news outlet that doesn't follow an ideological line.
True. I think that's one of the issues, I'm sorry, with journalism itself, and going back to the public trust aspect of it, is that people we answer that question for them by leaning to the left a little bit
Chuck
in
Wolf
the
has a
newsroom.
question.
Yeah.
Chuck Wolf, retired from the Associated Press, the world's greatest news
Good to
organization.
see you.
158 years, I think. Just sort of a takeoff on what Don said and what Al said earlier about hedge funds taking over newspapers. By the way, what they want from the newspapers is the real estate. That's why they buy the newspapers. That's where the assets are.
Yep.
You can have variations on this theme happening in other aspects of your community. You know, maybe your newspaper today, maybe your neighborhood grocery next week, or your neighborhood hardware store or your local bank.
Pharmacy.
How many of y'all ever patronized Hometown Pharmacy? Had 2 locations, Frankfort's gone now. And it was bought out by CVS, I think. When you say, well, okay, that's, like Don said, that's capitalism. And I'm just saying, be aware of that. So people need to connect those dots. I'm not saying there's anything evil about that, but I'll give you another good example about I read about this in the New York Times a couple of years ago. There was a small family-owned grocery chain up in the New York area. I think they had 4 or 5 stores. Very popular neighborhood groceries, kind of like, very much like Danny Bryant's Pick Pack was down here. And they were bought out. The new owner stripped all the assets and borrowed heavily against the property and then declared bankruptcy and skipped town. So those are shysters. But it's a lot of people in this country have a misimpression that, okay, the newspaper goes away, well, good riddance. We don't need them anyway. But like I said, okay, maybe it's the newspaper today and next week it's your local grocery or your local hardware store or some other aspect which can have a profound effect on the community or at least the neighborhood within the community. And just be aware of that. Just be aware of that.
Thank you.
I was telling someone earlier that, I think I was telling Laura this, that I had an elected official come up to me a few months ago, and we have some inter-agency issues going on with county fire, city fire. There's all kinds of stuff going on there. And a elected official came up to me privately and said, I really wish we had a newspaper and a reporter. And the reason is, and elected officials, of course, never want to see you in a meeting except when they need something. But you know what that person needs? He needs somebody to be the arbiter between these 2 agencies that are not talking to each other and are just blaming each other. So there's no one doing an investigation to find out who's doing what, who's saying what. I filed an open records request a week or so ago. I got records back. I don't know what I'm going to do with them yet, but I've started asking questions and people are nervous just because I'm asking. But these are things that you can do as a citizen.
Yeah, the Open Records Act doesn't apply to journalists any differently than it applies to you.
No, and I will say too, in an effort to give you energy toward this, is that when I arrived in Kentucky, I knew nothing, zero about Kentucky politics. I knew nothing about what was going on in my town. The way I learned who the legislators were is I spent an entire summer sitting in interim committee meetings with my laptop, looking up whose name was talking and connecting and being like, this one's got the same name as that one. Is it his dad? Is it his brother? But it took me a summer to figure everybody out, to figure out what counties they're in, what their big issues are. And once you get that ball rolling, you can figure it out. But I think a lot of citizens do not go to even local meetings because they feel like they'll feel out of place. They don't know anybody. They will be uncomfortable or they'll be bored.
Some people don't even know they can attend.
Correct. Yes. People do not even know they can attend. I did not know where the meetings were in Frankfort. I had to ask somebody where the committee meetings were.
You know, when you talk about that statement the magistrate or whatever made to you, what they wanted you to do was find the facts.
Yes.
And that is the fundamental purpose of journalism, is to be the fact finder. And for more than a century, wire services and major papers were the major fact finders in the country. And they still are. And the national outfits like the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, and to some extent the LA Times have a broad enough circulation that and an online subscriber base that they can still be robust news organizations. But that is much more difficult for smaller news organizations to do. And that's one reason the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette is going to be closing in a couple of months. Don Stossberg has had his hand up for a while.
One of my thoughts is this problem is complicated by the technology changes over the years. When I was a kid, newspaper came. So many people, young people, they look at the current newspaper and say, that's a The one thing you didn't say in your comments, Al, was if we practice journalism, how much are we going to be paid? I happen to know we have a lot of writers in some of the great jobs, but they're all doing it for free.
Right. Yeah.
And that is the problem, is how the revenue, I don't really quarrel with the newspaper trying to make a profit. Like everything else we do that's very valuable, we get paid for.
The question is how much?
Yeah, right. So you're asking us to be the leaders of society. And most people I know in this room are already doing that. So one of my questions is, are there any rural small town newspapers are doing any innovative techniques? One I thought of in this town, we take the get theirs and the non-copy, and we tell them we may hire them as part-time affiliates, and we give them a certain fee, and it might not be as much as a token, but it's a recognition. And because we got people knowledgeable about every agency in state government. Now, we live in this town, we can't find out what the vote is in the Kentucky now. So it's a long, complicated subject, but I'm wondering if there's any models out there for a new way for smaller communities.
Well, one thing that we've seen a lot of in the last 5 years is universities and colleges are stepping up to fill the gap. For 14 years, I published a newspaper in Midway with my students from UK. And, I think Midway was about the best covered town in Kentucky when that was going on. And nobody paid anybody anything. The town loved it. And it's now been subsumed into the Woodford Sun, but it kind of set an example. And there's a great center at the University of Vermont called the Center for Community News that is trying to coordinate these efforts around the country. And Laura's made some efforts in that regard. You might want to talk about how difficult it is to do that kind of thing and the frustrations you've had. Mm-hmm. I think there's still some potential to have a newsroom of college students covering state government on a regular basis.
Yeah, I did try to do that. I taught journalism at Kentucky State University for a number of years, off and on since the 90s, in fact. And Al helped, and years ago, it's been since 2012, actually, we formed a nonprofit called the Kentucky Institute for Public Affairs Reporting, and we tried to get K-State on board to offer classes and set up the news bureau like 19 other states have. And in fact, right before I left K-State, I got a grant from Richard's group at Vermont to try to create the news bureau here, and I just couldn't get the university on board with it. There's changes in administration and other challenges there, and we just never could get it worked out. Even with the community support, at one point Derek Graham went up and talked to my department chairman because he was on board with it when he was still serving in the House. So, we just never could get it off the ground with the administration there. But it would be, I'm still willing to help if the new president is interested, but he's got his hands on, busy with other things too. Yeah, Sam's been patient.
Changing the subject a little bit.
Yeah.
I'm curious about, and Terry, I guess directly to you mainly, your experience with Substack and talking a little bit about Substack, because I know personally, a lot of what I'm reading right now is from Substack.
Right.
Because so many good journalists and good writers have gone to Substack and publishing. And I know, I'm sure you're calling as well, so I just like to hear this.
I have a love-hate relationship with Substack. Of course, I have lost track, and you may have too, of the number of Substack subscriptions that I have that are paid. I don't even know how many people I'm paying now, but the good news is that I know I'm only paying for subscriptions to writers that I trust, whether they are reporters or opinion columnists. So I do appreciate that, and I appreciate the fact that they can publish whenever they want, but it's like anything, it's it's a kind of just a different form of social media where you have to kind of go through the chaff and figure out what's good and what's not. But I love it because I have a place to say my piece when I want to say it. Those pieces usually end up in a newspaper, usually the Kentucky Lantern, who I write mostly for now. But it's a place also where I find other writers, and I don't know if there's something that can be created by the community on a Substack. Al, what do you think about that from a news perspective?
I don't know. Substack is a reflection of the overturning of the basic business model of news media. The old business model used to be that advertising paid for 75% of your operations and circulation paid for 25%. And now, at the New York Times, circulation is paying, I think, like 70% of their budget. So Substack is an example of individual journalists leaving legacy news media and creating their own brand on this platform and finding people who will support them through subscriptions. And I salute them for that, but here's the rub. It's still mainly about opinion.
Correct. And there are journalists who just did straight journalism who have Substack pages that I've realized I don't like now that they just don't have an editor and that they just write their opinion. Because what I appreciated about them is they fed me straight information when they were in a news organization. So you really do have to, and I'm sure you know this, you have to figure out who you want to follow and what you want to do with that. It's also an outcropping, I think, of social media, and I often ask people, when you wake up in the morning, what is the first thing you do? And the first thing most people do is they open their phone and they scroll their Facebook feed.
I read Axios.
I don't scroll the social media when I get up, but that's what most people do, and that's where they think they're getting their information. And I was reading the other day at a news outlet that what's happening is people we have too much information, so we are gorging on information, but we are starved for facts. We have no news, but we have a glut of stuff. Yeah. And then what happens when people then mentally go through the scroll is your brain gets tired and you feel overloaded, and then you move on with your day and do something else, which means you don't do what? You do not seek out a news organization then to read because your brain's tired. You got tired by scrolling through social media, getting mad, getting irritated, this and that, and now you're not even looking for news, which is really sad.
Yeah, you made a good point about people not having editors.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Everybody needs an editor.
Mm-hmm. Hallelujah.
Every damn body. And, there's a lot of good work being done on Substack, but, I just wonder how many people are letting a second or third party read them. Well, yes. I think a lot of spouses are playing editors. Yep. And I lost my train of thought.
See what you did, Bill.
I'll get back to it.
Well, the other thing, too, is professional journalists work under a code of ethics as well, that a lot of
I remember what I was going to say.
Opinion writers don't.
People have the notion, because they've been watching TV reporters do stand-ups for most of their lives, that journalism is a solo kind of trade. Mm-hmm. Well, Chuck and James and Ben and others in here know that's not true. It is a collective enterprise, and the best news organizations have editors who will wring out the misconceptions, the bias, the errors, and give you a good report. And the fewer editors you have, the less reliable your report is likely to be.
Yeah, do you want to talk about that for a minute? We were talking before the discussion about your
editing.
Yes, your editing process.
So I write mostly for Jamie Luke at the Kentucky Lantern now, and I mostly write about the legislature when they're in session. But I'll give you an example. Last week, I sent Jamie a piece that I thought was excellent. And I thought I made all my points and all the connections were there and I had cited all my sources, and then I didn't hear from her for a day. So that was really odd. And then the next morning she said, she wrote me this long email, this isn't really working for me. I think you're trying to make something connect to something else that doesn't make sense. And then I thought, well, I'll go back and leave it sit a couple days and go redo it. So then I went back and I rewrote it, and then she wrote back again and said, nope, still not working. So I worked on that piece for probably 10, 12 hours, and then I just scratched it. Mm-hmm. On Substack, people would go post it and move on because they don't want to waste their time doing the work and have no one read it. I love having an editor. I love when she says, this isn't working, that isn't working, could you get this instead, et cetera. It makes me feel more confident that I am factually correct, even though I'm writing an opinion piece.
I had a similar situation too, and Lowell Reese still was my editor. He was publisher of the Gazette. I wrote this great editorial, and we were editing via email, and he made some comments, and then he said, this is great, don't run it. And I said, okay, and I didn't, because of what some of the fallout might be and perception coming back at the Gazette and that type of thing, because but to your point, I really appreciated the fact that he said it was great. Well, it can be, yes, because there's an old adage in newspapers: when in doubt, leave it out.
Leave it out.
You just don't. If you have any questions about it, don't run it, because you can't pull it back once it's out there. But I appreciated the fact that someone was looking at my work and said, "Yeah, this is good, but you don't want to run this." And he, was the little devil on my shoulder who held me back from publishing something that wasn't that great.
Yeah.
So as a consumer, like I said, there's all this chat. How does the consumer find a reliable news source?
The New York Times is a reliable news source. So is the Washington Post, even though you may not like its owner. I think that, a local news source, I'll say this for the State Journal folks, it's all you got. You ought to support it. Somebody has to pay for journalism. And even though you may not like the product, for God's sake, subscribe to it and help them survive. They may not be owned forever by Carpenter News Media. Maybe the suggestion earlier will come to fruition, and they'll be willing to sell this paper to a local nonprofit. Support your local newspaper, please.
Kathy?
Yes. You mentioned, Al Posh, you mentioned earlier that the Hopkinsville newspaper was now a successful or a better paper.
Well, it's the online product that Jennifer Brown started.
But is it a nonprofit?
It's a nonprofit.
Okay. So is that a model either there or in other cities?
Yeah, it's working in probably 200 cities across the country. Now, the quality of the journalism varies, and people don't get paid much, and there's a lot of grant money going into it that may or may not last. We're still feeling our way into the new age of media business models. But there is some hope in towns Frankfort size and larger. Smaller towns than this have real difficulty because there's just not enough people, not enough capital, not enough audience to really make it work. And what I hope to see happen, and I'm trying to help some people do it, is have groups of weekly papers owned by a regional nonprofit that can consolidate the back office operations and the management, but still have local people turning out news.
Mm-hmm. We have time for about one more question. It's almost 7:30. Yeah, we'll take two. Go ahead, ladies before gentlemen there.
You were talking about reduction staff, and what I worry about in my lifetime, what I've really valued is investigative journalism. And I'm afraid they're not going to have the staff and the money to hire good investigative journalists. I mean, my generation is really impacted by, Watergate, like, what am I thinking? But, like Washington Post, what's the name of it?
Woodward and Bernstein.
Yes. And I watched on Netflix the other day a program about Seymour Hersh, and it's called Cover It. And so many things in American life have been covered up, and it takes good journalists to dig that out and get the truth out to people. And I'm appalled at all the things that have been covered up because nobody dug them out, or there was some obstacle.
Yeah, we don't know what's been covered up because it hasn't been uncovered.
Because it's still covered, yeah.
But you can, I think you can say without fear of contradiction that there are hundreds of minor to major scandals in this state that have not been reported because we no longer have a robust news media and enough investigative reporters to turn over the rocks and report them.
That's right. Caleb, you had a question?
Yeah, so you're making me both reflect on cherished memories as a reporter and also lament the demise of news organizations because, I've worked in radio, print, and TV at different times, and TV is, of course, a vast wasteland. But there is, I think, a mentality that I want you to comment on among local officials when there isn't a reporter regularly at their meetings, when there isn't somebody poking on a regular basis, that this sort of entitlement mentality has taken root, and now they don't know how to respond. They don't appreciate their duty to have this mediator or to deal with the local mediator that is the journalist. And I think in terms of creating a license for corruption, not having to confront that person who's really after the facts is a huge risk. And I mean, you said there were hundreds of scandals that potentially have not been reported on. The lack of journalism creates greater opportunity.
And that's an argument for any nonprofit to start up, to do some journalism.
This also gets to the courage part. I mentioned earlier, the positive thing about going to meetings and reporting out what's happened in the meeting. That's a good thing, and it's a good thing for you as a citizen. You meet other citizens, you get to know your elected officials, etc. The other side of that is that you have to then have the courage to report on someone that you may know well and don't want to say anything bad about. So that's really hard, especially, Kentucky with its 120 counties. It's really hard, I think, in the small counties where everybody knows everybody. And it's one thing if you are a professional news organization, you have a newspaper, and maybe your family owned the newspaper forever and everybody knows who you are. It's another thing just to be a citizen and go report on something or dig into something that's happened and report on it and then take that blowback. When this first started happening to me, and my husband is here tonight, but I would go home and I would say, should I back off? And his answer from the beginning, and it was the same every time, was no, step into it and make them challenge you. And every time you step forward, they back off because they don't have as much courage as they'd like you to think they have because they're scared.
Yep.
They're afraid you're going to find more than you've already found. So other people in your community will then, and other elected officials too, will then respect you for doing that work.
Ben, stand up. I'm not going to make you talk, but I want to introduce the crowd to Ben Gish, the publisher of the Mountain Eagle in Whitesburg, Kentucky.
Ben should have been up here tonight.
Now, Ben's bashful. He didn't want to get up and talk, but, he did a great story this week about the people in Letcher County who are paying these awful electric power bills. One of the poorest places in the country is being hit with some of the worst electric rate increases. And it's the kind of good investigative journalism that, it was a Herald Leader level kind of story. And, there still are a few papers out there that do that. When I taught community journalism at UK, I told students, if you don't remember anything else out of this course, remember this, that the secret to success in community journalism is management of the ever-present conflict between your institutional obligation to the community and your desire to be liked.
That's a really hard one.
Yeah.
But as a recovering people pleaser, doing opinion journalism and even some straight reporting, leaning left in a very red county has been very good for me. I am always willing to have hard conversations. I meet regularly with my police department. I go to the Capitol. I do not meet with Democrats when I go to the Capitol. I only meet with Republicans. I don't have anything. It's like watching MSNBC or MS Now, whatever. I don't watch any of that. It doesn't give me anything. I already know all that stuff. I don't need that. What I need is the person that disagrees with me or the news outlet that disagrees so that I know what I'm arguing against. And I think a lot of times we spend so much time in the silo, and Facebook and all the social media and Twitter does this too, gets you into a silo, and then we don't really know how to speak to people outside of our comfort zone.
Right.
And that's the most fun I have. I love going and talking to those guys.
Yeah, and that's what I loved about being a reporter. You could talk to just about anybody about just about anything. And I'll admit, working for a well-respected metropolitan newspaper was an advantage. Doors would open to you, calls would get returned that wouldn't be done for people at smaller outlets. But I think I was able to always persuade people that I was trying to just keep people between the white lines and not leaning one way or the other. And one of my editors once said that the Republicans think Al's a Democrat and the Democrats think Al's a Republican, so he must be doing a pretty good job.
That's a great compliment.
Yep, it is. So, okay, anyone else have anything? It's past 7:30. Time's flown by. Okay, well, thanks so much for our guests, Terry Carter, Al Cross.
Thank
you
you
all for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you for Together Frankfort.
I'll add one thing. If you want to commit journalism, I'll be your editor at least once.
Yeah, I'll do that too. Hey, Al, Tom Loftus and Roger Alford both said that about me. They weren't sure if I was a Democrat or a Republican. They couldn't tell. I've taken it as that, especially from other journalists. Yeah.
Is this on? Okay, thank you all so much for doing this. I hope that it gave everybody, is it not working? Is it working? I hope it gave folks something to think about that they could do besides wring their hands. I know that some days that's about all we can take. Hold on.
There's cake involved.
Yeah, there's cake involved. Everybody's running away here.
There's the other's cake. Thank you, Harry.
So when you have your coffee, you'll think of it.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming, everybody.
Thank you all. Real quickly before you head off for cake, our next town hall is going to be March 5th at the library, and it's going to be on flood mitigation. It'll be almost a year since the great flood of April of last. So be sure to show up for that. Thanks again for coming. If you want to grab your chair, if you feel energetic, and take it to the other room or the far room, that would be great. Thank you all.